I was in a small, tiny village outside a small town in a remote part of Haiti. A very, very difficult place to live at a school that the Episcopal Diocese, school and church that's part of the Episcopal Diocese of Haiti, where a lot of the students had to make an half-hour to an hour trip each way to get water, and to the well to get water in the morning, and again in the evening before and after school. A good hour and a half to 2 hour trip twice a day with these huge things of water on their backs so they would have water. And the second time I was there, we were having to teach people how to wash their hands without using gallons of water. They thought that the more water they used, somehow the cleaner it would get. And we had to teach people that you could wash your hands safely, get them clean and germs off of them without using 2 gallons of water, because the more they did that, the more they had to fetch it, or they wouldn't wash their hands at all, which was worse. But we had to teach them, and they had to trust us that this would actually work. It's one of our basic hygiene practices, isn't it? Washing hands. What are some other hygiene practices that we do? Can you think of any others that are just super common? Brushing teeth, right. I always think of flossing. I think of flossing, actually, Mother Margaret, more than brushing, because brushing actually feels better when you do it. Flossing, I can't tell if it's doing anything, but I do it because I'm supposed to, right? Because that's true of hygiene practices sometimes, right? We can't always see whether or not they're effective. When I was a kid, I knew I needed to wash my hands because they had dirt all over them. I'd been outside playing. And if they didn't have dirt on them, and Mom said, go wash your hands, I would think, why? They're clean. What good is it doing? Because you can't always see the effectiveness of it, can you? You don't always see it. And so we actually have to trust people who've studied this, who've researched this, who know more than we do about it, right, to say this is a good thing. And the other piece of it, and this was one of the big challenges in Haiti when we were teaching how to wash hands, was to assure people this wasn't just for their own protection. It was actually for the good of everyone around them too, right? We've learned some things about hygiene in the last year, haven't we? It's a word that we've all known, but it's been a lot more used in the last year during this pandemic, because we've talked more about things like hand washing and hand sanitizing and some of these things, and mask wearing. And like a lot of hygiene things, you can't always see their effectiveness. And so you have to trust experts that they're effective. And we're learning as we go along, admittedly, right? We were taking temperatures for a while. We have a little stack, you may not know this, we have a little stack of unopened thermometers that we bought thinking we would need to use these. Now we know we don't. But masks, we know are effective. I can't tell if it's effective or not, but I trust that it is, right? And so I wear it. And I wear it not because it's protecting me, because it's protecting everyone else and making everything safe, and it's caring for others, right? So then the other term I learned in the middle of all this, the opposite of hygiene, but uses the same word, right? We talk about it here some. Hygiene theater. Have you ever heard that term, hygiene theater? It's doing things that may not actually be effective, but it kind of makes us feel better. It reassures us that we're doing something. Taking temperatures has become kind of hygiene theater in this. We'll take everyone's temperature, even though it's actually not going to help keep us safer from this pandemic necessarily. We do it. People talk a lot, it's not hygiene in the same sense of germs, but taking your shoes off at the airport to put them in the x-ray thing actually isn't making us more secure, but it's making us feel more secure when we go through the airport. And those theatrical kinds of things seem to matter sometimes to us, and so we do them. But in our day, we know wearing masks properly, that's why we require it here. We're not negotiating these things here. You can have different opinions, I keep saying, but this is what we're doing here. Wearing masks, washing and hand sanitizing, we're doing those things because they actually keep everyone safe. And we're trying not to do too much of the hygiene theater thing. Now I have to tell you, thinking about all that on the Feast of the Baptism of Jesus makes me wonder whether or not we do any sort of theological hygiene theater kinds of things. Because go with me for a minute. I think if you listened to the way that a lot of church-going people talk about baptism, it starts sounding a little bit like people talk about things that are hygiene theater. I don't think it actually does anything, but I'm doing it because it makes me feel better. Not actually believing there's any effectiveness to it. But I can tell you, as we celebrate the feast of the baptism of Jesus, this is not theatrical, it's not pretend, it's not playing at something. It actually makes a difference in our lives. Just like some of those hygiene practices, although it's not a hygiene, I understand it's not a hygiene practice, I know that. But, and the risk in talking about it this way is that we somehow think that a human being is dirty until they get cleaned by the waters of baptism, and we don't mean that. But like those hygiene things, we can't really see necessarily that it's doing anything. You pour water over a child's head. Does their forehead change in any visible way? It doesn't really, does it? When you anoint them with oil, with that sign of the cross, about the only person that ever actually sees it on their forehead is the priest as they do it, because it goes away very quickly. So we can't really see it. So what do we have to do? We have to trust people who've looked at this, who've prayed about this, who've studied this, who've lived this for years, that it actually makes a difference. And you can go through 2,000 years of the story of the Christian church, and just about every theologian who has stood the test of time will tell you that baptism changes lives. It's not just that it might, it's that it does. And we also know, because we see it at its best, communities of baptized people make each other better, stronger, more faithful, more courageous to stand up for justice and righteousness. And those communities are transforming agents in the world around them at their best. Baptism does that. It's part of what changes us and makes us who we are. So we celebrate this. We bring people into the family of God through the waters of baptism, not because it's a nice thing to do, not because, well, just in case something goes wrong. Well, my grandparents will be upset if I don't baptize my baby. Do we hear that one sometimes? We do. And that's okay, but that's not why we do it. We do it because it changes lives. It actually works. Now, at this service here, so earlier today, we had an in-person service and we baptized some children, safely distanced and all of that, practicing our other hygiene things as we do in this pandemic time. This service, we don't have baptisms today, but we are going to renew our baptismal covenant. We're going to, if you will, recall that baptism, ask for the grace, for the reality, the transforming reality of that baptism to be renewed within us for the coming period of time. Because we need it, and we need to be that kind of presence in the world. This is not theater. This is not play acting. Baptism changes lives. It's changed your life and mine. And when we get to those times where it doesn't seem like much is going on again in our spiritual life, it's time to renew that baptismal covenant. To remember who God is, who we are, what God promises us and what we promise God. That's what that baptismal covenant is. So we'll do that today. We'll stand up in just a couple seconds. We'll ask for the grace to let that baptism change us, transform us every day. To let it be that opening to the presence of God that enables us to live that faithful life in the world. No theater here. Real, effective, life-changing baptism.